the surviving spouse's elective share doesn't reduce what passes to the next generation. The attorney had replied with a detailed breakdown. Under New York law, he explained, a surviving spouse has the right to claim an elective share, generally the greater of $50,000 or 1/3 of the net estate. However, he continued, assets held in a properly structured revocable living trust fall outside the probate estate entirely. If Mrs. Vance structured her estate planning to place assets in trust rather than passing them through a will, the surviving spouse's elective share rights would apply only to the probate estate, which could be made very small. Chloe had replied 4 hours later. That's exactly what I needed to know. What do we do to make sure that outcome is as favorable as possible for the family? I set the pages down flat on the table and pressed both palms over them to stop my hands from shaking. The fluorescent lights hummed above me with the same indifferent patience they'd had the day before. She went to a lawyer, I said, my voice raw. 4 years ago. She was planning this 4 years ago. Yes, Aldridge said. He didn't dress it up, and Marianne knew. The words sat in the vault room like stones dropped in still water. She knew all of it, and she never said a word to me. She left a note at the bottom of the last page, Aldridge said. Read it. I turned to the final sheet, Marianne's handwriting near the end, the pen pressed harder than usual into the paper. I didn't tell Art because I know my husband. He would have driven straight to Julian's building and said everything on his mind loudly and without any diplomacy whatsoever, and Chloe would have used it to push Julian further from us both. So I did what I always do when I can't shout. I documented, I planned, I made sure. I stared at that last sentence until the letters stopped making sense and started making something else, something closer to the particular ache of being known completely by another person, of having someone understand not just what you would do, but why you would do it, and love you enough to work around it instead of through it. She was protecting me, I said. My voice broke on the last word and I let it. Even then she was still protecting me. Aldridge didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was careful and steady, the voice of a man who had sat with people in difficult rooms for a long time. There's more in the box, he said, but I think that's enough for this morning. He stood and picked up his legal pad. Tonight, Mac's place not here. He moved toward the door. The USB, don't watch it alone. Don't watch it. Aldridge's office on the second floor was nothing like the vault room below it, where the vault was cold and fluorescent and built for permanence. This room was warm and lived in dark wood paneling, 2 leather chairs facing a desk covered in neatly stacked files, a window that looked out over Broadway and let in the thin October afternoon like it was something worth having. A credenza along one wall held a coffee maker that had clearly been used hard over many years. He poured 2 cups without asking and set one in front of me. I wrapped both hands around the mug and looked at the cream-colored envelope on the desk between us. That's the one from the top of the box, I said, the one she put where I'd reach for it first. I know, Aldridge said. She told me what she put where and why. She was very deliberate about the order. I picked up the envelope and broke the seal. Inside were 2 things, a handwritten letter, 4 pages in Marianne's small even script, and a printed document on Empire Trust letterhead, dense with numbers and account details. I set the printed document aside and unfolded the letter. Do you mind if I read parts of this out loud? That's exactly what she hoped you'd do. I started at the top. Oh, Art, if you're reading this, you found the wax tin. Of course you did. You always remember what I say, even when you think you're not paying attention. I need to explain some things. Not because I owe you an explanation, but because you are the most honest man I have ever known, and honest men deserve honest answers. My throat tightened. I kept going. She wrote about the money, where it had come from, what she had done with it, written with the matter-of-fact clarity of a woman who wanted to make absolutely sure I understood every word before I reached the number at the end. You remember how you used to bring your paycheck home on Friday evenings? She wrote. You'd come in through the back door, still in your work clothes, smelling like sawdust and linseed oil, and you'd put that check on the kitchen counter with both hands like you were making an offering. You were Art. That's exactly what it was. I set the letter down a moment and pressed the back of my hand against my mouth. Take your time, Aldridge said. I'm fine, I said, which was not entirely true, but was true enough to keep going. Starting in 1989, Marianne had written, I began setting aside a small amount from each deposit before I transferred the rest to our household account. Small amounts, $15 some weeks, $20 when things were good. Never enough that you'd notice. Never enough to affect the grocery budget or Alfie's school supplies or the electric bill. I invested it. I looked up. Alfie was a boy she tutored for 3 years, I told Aldridge. Kid from the next block. She never charged his family a cent. Aldridge nodded. She mentioned him. I went back to the letter. She had started with a sawmill, one small company in the timber country outside Eugene, Oregon. Aldridge confirmed the name with a single nod when I read it aloud. She'd chosen it because she had been reading the Wall Street Journal every morning for years and believed with the particular conviction of someone who had watched her husband work wood for 2 decades that the world would always need people who built things that lasted. She was reading the journal every morning, I said. I thought she was doing the crossword. She was doing both, Aldridge said. She told me that. She said the crossword kept her sharp and the journal kept her informed, and between the two of them, she had everything she needed. The sawmill had been acquired 15 years later by a technology company expanding its infrastructure into the Pacific Northwest. Land, not lumber, was what they wanted, and the acreage outside Eugene was exactly the size and location they needed for a new data center campus. The stock had appreciated nearly 5,000% over the life of the holding. I read that sentence twice. 5,000%. 4,800 and change, Aldridge said. She reinvested the proceeds. Blue Chip Holdings Real Estate Investment trusts a handful of positions in sectors she'd followed for years. She never speculated. She never chased a trend. She just kept showing up the same way you did. He paused. She came to me in 2010 with a portfolio worth just under $800,000. She'd built it entirely on her own over 21 years. The mug in my hands had gone cool. I hadn't noticed. $800,000, I said. Starting from $15 a week. Starting from $15 a week, Aldridge confirmed. We grew it from there. She was an exceptional client, Mr. Vance. In 31 years of wealth management, I have never worked with anyone more patient, more disciplined, or more clear about what she was building and why. He leaned forward slightly. Every year at our annual review, she said the same thing to me, the same sentence word for word without fail. What did she say? Aldridge met my eyes. She said, Tom, this money belongs to Art. It came from his work. Make sure it's still there when he needs it. The tears came, then not the restrained kind I'd been managing since the funeral, but the deep, full kind that started somewhere below the chest and moved upward without asking permission. I pressed the heels of both hands against my eyes until I saw white, then pulled them away and looked at the ceiling until the worst of it passed. Aldridge waited. He was extraordinarily good at waiting. I picked up the Empire Trust summary and turned to the first page. 4 pages of figures allocations, account structures, performance history going back to 2010. I read through the first 3 pages slowly, the numbers accumulating the way the years had accumulated steadily without drama. One careful decision compounding on top of the last. Then I reached the bottom of page 4, a single line. The current total value of the Marianne Grace Vance Revocable Living Trust as of the previous Friday's market close. I read it. I set the paper flat on the desk with both hands and stared at the wall behind Aldridge's head for a count of 8 full seconds, because I needed somewhere neutral to look while my mind tried to make sense of what my eyes had just processed. 48.5, I said finally. The words felt like something borrowed. $48.5 million. $48,512,000 as of Friday, Aldridge said. The figure moves with the market, but the core position is stable. I looked down at my hands on the desk. The hands of a man who had spent 40 years cutting and joining and finishing other people's furniture, scarred across the knuckles, permanently stained at the cuticles, with the ghost of old finishes that no amount of scrubbing entirely removed. She did all this, I said, with these. Aldridge shook his head once quietly. No, Mr. Vance. She did it because of these. He let that settle a moment. There's one more thing in the letter, page 3. She wanted you to read it last. I turned to page 3 and found the paragraph he meant. I read it, and my shoulders began to shake before I reached the end of the second sentence, and by the time I finished, I was not pretending to be fine anymore. The money came from your work, Art, Marianne had written. Every single dollar of it. You built it with your hands and your back and 40 years of showing up every single morning without complaint. All I did was make sure it didn't disappear. That's all I did. You earned every cent of it. And tonight when you're sitting somewhere quiet, I want you to let yourself believe that. I called Mac from the sidewalk outside Empire Trust, my back against the brick wall, the late afternoon traffic on Broadway moving past me like it had somewhere important to be. He picked up on the second ring. How'd the bank go? He asked. I need your laptop tonight, Mac. A pause. How bad? I'll tell you when I get there. Door's open, he said. I'll put something on the stove. Frank Mallister lived in a row house on 44th Street in Sunset Park that he'd bought in 1987 and maintained with the particular stubbornness of a man who believed that if something was worth having, it was worth keeping in good repair. The front stoop was swept. The window boxes still had the last of the season's geraniums in them, rust red and hanging on. Inside the house smelled like pot roast and old wood, and the motor oil that Mac never entirely got off his hands no matter how hard he scrubbed, which was the same problem I had with sawdust, so neither of us had ever mentioned it to the other. He was at the stove when I came in. He looked at my face turned back to the pot and said, "Sit down." I sat. He brought 2 plates to the table, poured coffee without asking if I wanted any, pulled out the chair across from me, and sat down with both hands wrapped around his mug. "Talk while you eat," he said. "Tell me everything." So I did. I told him about the fake letter and the resealed envelope. I told him about the wax tin and the key, and Sandra Collins at the counter saying we'd been expecting you, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I told him about the green folder, the timeline entries, the LLC, the emails between Chloe and the attorney in Connecticut. Mac's eyebrows went up at the LLC, his jaw tightened at the emails. He set his fork down and did not pick it back up. Then I told him about the number. Max stared at me across the table for a long moment, his coffee mug halfway to his mouth apparently forgotten. 48.5 million, I said again, because I needed to hear it twice myself. Art, his voice came out low and careful, the voice he used on job sites when something structural had gone wrong and he needed everyone to stay calm. Say that number one more time. 48,500,000 as of Friday's market close. Max set the mug down, pressed both hands flat on the table, looked at the ceiling, then at me, then at the ceiling again. "Marianne," he said finally to no one in particular. Then he shook his head slowly, and something in his expression shifted from shock into something that looked almost like recognition. Like a man who had known a woman for 40 years and was only now understanding how much he had underestimated her. "There's still the USB, I said. I set it on the table between us. Aldridge told me not to watch it alone." Mac looked at the drive. "Did he say why?" "No, but the way he said it." I stopped. "He's seen it. Marianne showed him, and he still thought I shouldn't watch it by myself." Mac stood up without another word, went to the counter, and came back with his laptop. He set it open between us, took the USB from the table and held it a moment in his palm like he was gauging the weight of it. Then he plugged it in. One file, no name. Just a date, March 3rd, 2022. He clicked play. The video opened on a living room I didn't recognize immediately. Pale gray walls, a white sectional sofa, afternoon light coming through plantation shutters in long horizontal bars. The camera angle was low and slightly off-center, mounted somewhere near the upper corner of the wall, rather than held by hand. Then I recognized the shutters, the particular wooden slats, the way the light fell through them, at that angle in the afternoon. Julian and Chloe's old apartment in Murray Hill before they bought the place in Tribeca. And then I recognized something else. On the wall to the right of the sofa, hanging at the height it had always hung, was the clock. I had built it in the winter of 2017. White oak hand-cut joinery, a face I'd designed myself with hour markers in hammered brass. I had spent 11 weekends on it. Julian had thanked me at the wedding reception with a handshake and set it on the gift table next to a set of crystal wine glasses from Chloe's college roommate. The clock was on the wall in the video. "Mac," I said. "I see it," he said. In the video, Chloe stood with her back to the camera, a phone pressed against her ear. Her weight shifted onto one hip the way she stood when she was comfortable, when she didn't think anyone was watching. She was laughing at something the other person had said. Then her posture changed. The laugh stopped. Her voice dropped into a register I had heard only once before in the green folder, reading her emails to the attorney in Connecticut flat, and certain and stripped of everything performed. "The old man," she said, "he has nothing. A carpenter's pension and whatever the union puts in every month. When Marianne goes, I'll have him out of that house before he figures out what happened." A pause while she listened. "Julian won't fight me on it. He never fights me on anything." Another pause, a short laugh colder than the first. "I'm not worried about him. The man spent his whole life building furniture for other people's houses. He doesn't even know what a trust document looks like." The video continued another 30 seconds. Chloe shifting the conversation to something about a dinner reservation, and then it cut off. Mac closed the laptop. The kitchen went very quiet. Chester, his orange tabby, was asleep on the radiator in the corner, one paw hanging off the edge. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a truck downshifted on the hill 2 blocks over. "Art," Mac said, his voice careful in a way that told me he was choosing every word before he said it. "That clock on the wall." "I built it," I said. "Wedding gift. 11 weekends. Marianne put a camera inside the clock I built for them." I looked down at my hands on the table, the same hands that had cut those joints fitted, that face wrapped it in brown paper and brought it to the reception hall in the back of my truck. "She was in that apartment," I said. "She recorded everything. She didn't just know Mac." Mac leaned forward, both elbows on the table, his eyes red at the corners. "She documented it. She built a case." He pressed the back of his hand against his mouth a moment. When he lowered it, his jaw was set tight. 40 years I knew that woman. 40 years. He shook his head. "I never knew the half of it." He was quiet a while after that, turning his mug slowly on the table without lifting it. "You know what gets me?" he said finally. "Not the money. Not even the camera, clever as it was. It's that she carried all of it by herself. All those years. Sat across from him at Thanksgiving, at the wedding, held that boy's hand at your anniversary parties, and never once let on that she knew exactly what he was becoming." He looked at me. "That's a heavy thing to hold alone, Art. She held it so you wouldn't have to. She was better at carrying things than I ever gave her credit for," I said. My own voice sounded far away to me. I thought about all the mornings I'd left the house believing I was the one doing the hard, quiet work, the one who showed up without complaint, and how she had been doing a harder, quieter version of it the whole time in rooms I never saw, keeping a ledger of her own son's small betrayals so that when the day came I would not have to stand in that conference room defenseless. "I used to think the strong one in a marriage is the one who lifts the heavy end," I said. "She taught me it's the one who never lets you see how heavy their end really is." Mac didn't answer. He just reached across the table and gripped my forearm once the way he had 1,000 times on a job site when a beam went where it was supposed to go and let it go. Neither had I. I reached into my jacket pocket and closed my hand around the folded letter. Still there. 4 pages of Marianne's handwriting pressed against my ribs, and I held on to it while the kitchen settled around me and the clock on Mac's wall ticked forward into whatever came next. Mac did not go to bed. He refilled both mugs without being asked, pulled his chair a few inches closer to the table, and sat back down with his elbows on his knees and his hands wrapped around the mug and his eyes on me in the way he'd had since 1984. Steady and unhurried, the look of a man who had decided a long time ago that the people he cared about were worth the full cost of his attention. "The letter," he said. 4 pages. You haven't read it to me yet." I reached into my jacket and pulled it out. The paper was soft at the folds from how many times I'd handled it since the vault, not reading, just holding the way you hold something you're not sure you're ready for. I unfolded it under the kitchen light and smoothed the pages flat with my palm. "I'm going to read the parts that matter," I said. "Read all of it," Mac said. So I did. Marianne's voice came through the pages the way it always had, erect, unhurried, with that particular quality she'd had of saying exactly what she meant and meaning exactly what she said, no more and no less. The first page was about the trust. She had set it up in 2015 as a revocable living trust, she explained, which meant she controlled it completely while she was alive. Upon her death, it became irrevocable, unchangeable, permanent, and I became the sole beneficiary and the successor trustee, meaning the assets passed directly to me without going through probate court at all. "Julian and Chloe cannot challenge the trust through the will," she wrote, "because the trust exists entirely outside the will. Tom will explain the legal structure in detail. What you need to know is this: I spent 11 years making sure it could not be undone. It cannot be undone." "She spent 11 years on this," Mac said when I paused. 11 years, I said. Mac exhaled through his nose. He didn't say anything else, but his jaw worked the way it did when he was keeping something inside that wanted very badly to come out. I turned to the second page. This was where Marianne wrote about Julian, not with bitterness, not with the controlled fury I might have expected, but with the particular sadness of a woman who had watched something happen slowly and hadn't been able to stop it. Julian learned to measure things by their price somewhere along the way. She had written, "I don't know when it happened. I've looked back over the years trying to find the moment, and I can't locate it precisely which, Maybe means there wasn't one moment, just a slow accumulation of small choices that added up to the man who sat across the table from you at Howard's office and said the things he said and chose not to look away when he said them. I'm angry about that. I want you to know I'm angry about it. But he is still our son, Art. He is still our son. My voice broke on the last sentence. I stopped reading and pressed my thumb and forefinger against my eyes until the pressure helped. Keep going, Mac said quietly. She wrote it for you to finish. I nodded and turned to the third page. The third page was where Marianne told me about the camera. I had the clock serviced in January 2022, she wrote. I told Julian the mechanism needed adjusting. It did. There was a genuine issue with the escapement, one your craftsmanship deserved better than, and I want you to know I felt terrible about using your work that way. But I needed a reason to bring it to the shop, and I needed a reason Julian would accept without asking questions. The technician who installed the recording device was recommended by a private investigator I consulted through the library's legal aid referral service. He was discreet and professional. I paid him in cash from the grocery fund. You were right all those years when you said I kept better track of the grocery budget than anyone needed to. It turns out there was a reason for that too. Mac made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something that hurt. She paid for a private investigator out of the grocery budget, he said. She paid for a lot of things out of the grocery budget, I said. Mac rubbed the back of his neck with one hand, shaking his head slowly. Read the next part, he said. Whatever's next. I found the paragraph lower on page 3, the one I had been circling for 2 days without letting myself land on. Frank Mallister. Marianne had written, is too proud to accept help directly. You know this about him. I know this about him. He has known it about himself since approximately 1987, the year his back gave out on a job when he refused to let you help him with the medical bills, even though you offered 4 times. He turned you down 4 times, and you both pretended afterward it had never happened. In 2007, when his family was struggling after the contracting work dried up, I arranged for them to receive a truck through a promotional giveaway program. It was not an entirely real promotional giveaway program. I organized it through a small marketing firm in New Jersey that owed me a favor from a library fundraising event, and I covered the cost of the vehicle myself from savings. I did it that way so Frank would feel he'd won something fair, not that he'd been handed anything. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you. I knew you would have insisted on contributing, and then Frank would have found out, and that would have been the end of it. Please tell him when the time is right, and please tell him I hope he's gotten good use out of it. I stopped reading. Across the table, Mac had gone very still. His coffee mug was on the table, and both his hands were flat beside it, and he was looking at the middle distance between us with the expression of a man who has just had something rearranged inside him without his permission. The F-150, he said. The F-150, I said. He didn't speak for a long time. Chester jumped down from the radiator, walked the length of the kitchen, and jumped up onto the chair beside Mac with the supreme indifference of a cat who had decided his work here was to simply be present. Mac reached over without looking and put his hand on the cat's back. 18 years I've driven that truck, Mac said. Finally, his voice rough at the edges in a way I hadn't heard since his mother's funeral. 18 years? I thought I got lucky. He pressed his lips together hard. She bought me a truck, Art. She bought my family a truck because she knew I was too stubborn to take help, and she found a way around it. He lifted his eyes to mine. How did she know me that well? She knew everyone that well, I said. That was Marianne. Mac reached up and pressed the heel of his hand hard against one eye, then the other. When he lowered it, his jaw was set and his eyes were clear and red at the same time. What's on the last page? He asked. I turned to page 4. This was the page about us, about the third date, about 38 years, about the man Marianne said she had chosen every single day she woke up beside him. I read it straight through without stopping, and by the time I reached the last line, my shoulders were shaking, and I wasn't pretending otherwise, and Mac sat across from me and did not look away and did not say a word, because 40 years of friendship had taught us both that sometimes the most important thing one man can do for another is simply refuse to leave the room. When I finished, I folded the letter back into its 4 pages and pressed it flat against my chest with one hand. Mac, I said, tomorrow morning I need to go back to Aldridge. I know, he said. Will you drive me? He looked at me like I'd asked something almost insultingly unnecessary. What time? Before I tell you the number Marianne left behind, the one that made my hands shake, type A1 in the comments if you're still here with me. A reminder. This story carries fictional elements shaped for meaning. If that's not what you came for, no hard feelings. Find the content that fits you. I understand completely. Mac drove the F-150. Neither of us mentioned it directly, but I noticed the way his hands sat on the steering wheel when we pulled out of Sunset Park. Deliberate, like a man who was thinking about something he hadn't thought about in quite the same way before. He kept the radio on low, the whole ride, classic country out of a station in New Jersey, and I was grateful for the noise that didn't ask anything of me. Aldridge was at his desk when Sandra brought us up jacket-off reading glasses on a yellow legal pad covered in his handwriting. He stood when we came in and shook Mac's hand first. "Mr. Mallister," he said, "Marianne told me you'd be the one driving." Mac looked at him. "She mentioned me by name." "She mentioned everyone who mattered to Art by name with context," Aldridge said. He gestured to the chairs. "Sit down, both of you." I set the cassette on the desk between us. Aldridge looked at it the way you look at something you've been keeping safe for a long time and are finally releasing. "She left this with me 2 years ago," he said, along with the machine to play it on. He opened the bottom drawer of his desk and produced a small cassette player, gray plastic, the kind that had been unremarkable in 1994 and was now the sort of thing you found at estate sales. He set it on the desk beside the tape. "She said you'd know when the time was right." "It's right," I said. Aldridge slid the cassette into the player and pressed play. A second of tape hiss. Then Marianne's voice filled the room. I'd been bracing for it. I thought I had been bracing for it, but there is no real preparation for hearing the voice of someone you loved for 38 years, coming out of a machine in a room they never sat in, warm and clear and completely itself, as if no time had passed at all, as if she were simply in the next room and had something she needed to tell me. "Art," she said, "if you're hearing this, it means everything went the way I planned. You're probably in Tom's office. Mac is probably beside you." A pause. "Mac, if you're there, thank you for the drive, and I'm sorry about the truck. I should have told you years ago. I hope you'll forgive a librarian for being sneaky about it." Mac made a sound beside me, a short, broken exhale. He pressed his fist against his mouth and held it there. "I want to tell you something I wasn't sure I knew how to put in a letter," Marianne continued. "I invested in that sawmill in Oregon because I watched you work with wood every single day, and I understood in a way I don't think I could have explained to you at the time that the world would always need people who build things that last. I followed what I understood best, and what I understood best was you." She paused. The tape hissed softly. "Julian knows how to price a building, Art. He can tell you the cost per square foot of every property in Lower Manhattan. But he never learned the thing you knew the first day I met you, that the value of something isn't in what it sells for. It's in what went into making it. It's in the showing up. It's in the 40 years of Friday evenings when you came home with sawdust in your hair and put your earnings on the counter like an offering and trusted me completely with every cent." Another pause. "That trust is what the money is. That's all it ever was. I just gave it a number." I was not crying yet. I was somewhere past crying, in a place that was very quiet and very still, where things that had been loose inside me for weeks were finally settling into position like joinery finding its fit. "Don't let anyone rush you," Marianne said. "Don't let anyone guilt you, and don't you dare apologize for any of it." The tape ran on another few seconds of silence. Then it stopped. The room held the quiet the way good rooms do without filling it, without rushing past it. Mac lowered his fist from his mouth. His eyes were wet and he made no effort to hide it. Aldridge sat with his hands folded on the desk looking out the window at Broadway, giving us whatever time we needed. "Okay, Mari," I said finally, my voice steadier than I had any right to expect. "Okay." Aldridge turned back from the window. He reached into the folder on his desk and placed a single sheet in front of me. "The trust notification schedule. The formal letters go out Friday morning. Julian and Chloe will both receive written notification of the trust by end of business." I looked at the paper. 2 days. "How do you think they'll react?" Mac asked. "Marianne predicted they'd fight it," Aldridge said. "She predicted everything else right," I said. "Yes." Aldridge's voice was careful. "Which is why I want you to hear this clearly, Mr. Vance. Whatever Julian and Chloe do next, whatever attorneys they contact, whatever grounds they claim, Marianne spent 11 years preparing for exactly that. 9 cognitive assessments, independent legal review every single year, and you were not present at a single trust meeting, which eliminates any claim of undue influence before it can be made." He leaned forward. "There is no valid ground for a challenge. She made certain of it." I nodded, picked up the cassette from the desk and held it in both hands a moment, the plastic worn smooth at the corners. Marianne's handwriting on the label in red ink, and then put it in my jacket pocket next to the letter. Mac stood and put on his jacket. He looked at Aldridge. "One question." "Of course." "Did she know?" Mac asked. "When she was putting all this together, did she know it was going to work?" Aldridge considered that a moment. "She told me once that she wasn't certain it would work. She was certain it was right." He picked up his reading glasses and it would work. She was certain it was right. He picked up his reading glasses and set them back on his forehead. She said those two things weren't always the same, but in this case, she believed they were. Mac looked at me. I looked at Mac. "Let's go," I said. "There are things you have to go back for before someone else gets there first." I'd learned that the practical way, from 40 years of going into old buildings before the demolition crew arrived, pulling out the woodwork worth saving the carved banisters, the original crown molding the wide plank floors, modern construction didn't bother with anymore. You learned to move before the window closed. I was on Holly Street by 10 Friday morning. The Bradford pear trees had dropped another layer of leaves overnight, and they lay in damp clusters along the sidewalk in front of the house. Marianne's mums were still going in the front garden orange and burgundy and that deep rust red she always chose because she said it was the color of things that refused to quit. Evelyn Higgins was on her front porch when I pulled up, blue cardigan, a mug of tea held in both hands, watching me the way she'd been watching this block for 30 years. She stood up when I got out of the truck. "I was hoping you'd come back today," she said. "There's something else I should have told you Monday." I came up her front steps and sat in the other porch chair. The street was quiet. A few houses down, somebody's sprinkler was running despite the cold. "Tell me now," I said. Evelyn wrapped both hands tighter around her mug. 3 weeks before Marianne went into the hospital the last time, she said, "I saw Julian come to the house, not Chloe, Julian alone. It was a Saturday afternoon around 2. He let himself in with a key." She paused. "He was in there for almost an hour. When he came out, he had a folder under his arm, dark green. He put it in his car and drove away." "A dark green folder, the folder from the box at Empire Trust, the one marked J. He was looking for it," I said. Not a question. "I think so," Evelyn said. "He moved fast when he came out, the way people move when they've found something they were looking for and want to be gone before anyone notices." I thought about the fake letter about Julian holding the envelope for 2 seconds in Baxter's conference room. He had known there was something in Marianne's papers that documented what Chloe had been doing. He had gone looking for it and found the folder, taken it, and then discovered it was a copy. Marianne had kept the original in the vault where he could never reach it. "She made copies," I said quietly. "She kept the originals somewhere he couldn't get to them." Evelyn nodded. "That sounds like Marianne." I thanked her and went around to the back of the property, through the side gate to the workshop at the end of the garden. The oak tree Marianne and I had planted on our 10th anniversary stood at the garden's edge, taller than the roofline, its leaves gone amber at the tips. We had put it in the ground together on a Saturday in October, and now here it was 3 decades later, outlasting everything that had seemed permanent about that year. I unlocked the workshop and stepped inside. Alfie Torres was already there. He was 19 years old and had been coming to the workshop 3 mornings a week for 8 months, learning the trade the way I had learned it, by watching, by being told no. When he rushed by, being handed the worst jobs first and the interesting ones only after he'd proven he could be patient. He had dark eyes and permanently calloused thumbs, and the particular quality of stillness that good craftsmen develop where their hands moved, but the rest of them was completely quiet. He looked up when I came in, and something shifted in his face, relief, I thought, and something else underneath it. "Mr. Vance," he said, "I need to tell you something." "Tell me." He set down the piece he'd been working on and came to stand at the bench across from me. 2 nights ago, Wednesday night, there was a black SUV parked out on the street directly in front. It was there when I arrived in the morning and still there when I locked up at 6. He paused. "Then last night it came back. Different time, around 11. I was in the back finishing the Connecticut desk." "What did you do?" I asked. "I called 911 first," he said. "Non-emergency line. They said to document and call back if anything escalated." He reached into his back pocket and held out his phone. "Then I filmed it from the side window. You can't see faces clearly, but you can see 2 people in the front seats and the way they were watching the building, and you can see what the passenger was holding." I took the phone and watched the clip. 30 seconds shot through the gap between the window frame and the shade. The SUV was black. No front plate visible. 2 shapes in the front seats. The passenger side window was partway down, and the person there had something in their hand, long, cylindrical, a flashlight maybe, or something else. I handed the phone back. My chest was tight in a way that had nothing to do with grief. "The police came about 12 minutes after I called," Alfie said. "The SUV left before they arrived, but the officer took my statement in the video and gave me a report number." He pulled a folded paper from his shirt pocket and set it on the bench between us. I made sure to get it in writing. I looked at the report number, then at Alfie. He was 19 years old, and he had called the police, documented the incident, secured the paperwork, and was standing in front of me now with his hands steady and his voice level. "You did exactly right," I said. "You always say assess before you touch," Alfie said. "Same principle." I put the report in my jacket pocket. "Starting tonight," I said, "if that car comes back, you call the police first, then you call me. You do not go outside. You do not engage. You stay inside and you document." Alfie nodded once. "Yes, sir." I looked around the workshop, the Connecticut desk in progress on the main bench. The tools hung in their proper places, the grain of 40 years of work in the walls and the floor. Someone wanted access to this space badly enough to sit outside 2 nights running. "Alfie," I said, "thank you for staying." He looked down at the bench, picked up his sanding block, and went back to work. "This is your place, Mr. Vance," he said. Somebody needed to. Monday came in quietly and turned loud fast. I was on my second cup of coffee at the kitchen table on Holly Street. I had moved back in over the weekend because the apartment I'd been renting since Julian's notice felt less like independence and more like waiting, and I was done with waiting. I heard the knock at the front door at 7:15. Raymond stood on the stoop with his hands in his jacket pockets and his eyes on the welcome mat. My younger brother was 58 years old and had the particular look of a man who had rehearsed something on the drive over and was now not sure any of his rehearsal had been adequate. "Art," he said, "I need to talk to you." I held the door open. "Come in." He sat at the kitchen table without being asked, the way people sit when they need the support of something solid. I poured him coffee, set it in front of him, and sat down across from him and waited. Raymond wrapped both hands around the mug and stared into it a long moment. Then he looked up. 2 weeks before Marianne's funeral, he said, "Julian called me." I said nothing. "He told me there was going to be a will reading. He told me you were going to be difficult about the estate, that you'd gotten some ideas in your head about contesting things. He said he needed family there who could help calm you down and make sure everything went smoothly." He pressed his lips together. "He said if I came and signed a document afterwards, something supporting the distribution as written, he'd clear my debt. $40,000. He'd pay it directly to the creditor." The kitchen was very quiet. "How much of that is true?" I asked. "The part about me being difficult?" Raymond shook his head. "None of it. I knew that when he said it." He lifted his eyes to mine, and what was in them was not cruelty, just the deep, worn-down shame of a man who had made a bad choice for a comprehensible reason and had been living inside it ever since. I said yes anyway, Art. I needed the money. I've been underwater for 2 years, and I didn't see another way out. And I told myself it wasn't really hurting anyone because you'd be fine regardless. His jaw worked. "I know how that sounds." "Did he pay you?" I asked. "Half before the rotting," Raymond said, his voice dropping. "The other half was supposed to come after you signed something. I don't even know what the document was. He said his attorney would have it ready." I got up and refilled my coffee, stood a moment with my back to Raymond, looking out the window at the garden, the oak tree, Marianne's bed still holding the last of the season. I thought about what she had written in her letter. "He is still our son." And I thought about how that kind of love was not soft at all, but was in fact one of the hardest things a person could carry. I turned around. "Raymond," I said, "when was the last time I asked you for anything?" He couldn't answer that. He opened his mouth and closed it again. "Go home," I said. "I'm not angry, but go home." He stood, and at the door he stopped with his hand on the frame, the same door frame I'd replaced in 2011 when the original rotted through white oak fitted myself on a rainy Saturday afternoon while Marianne read on the porch and handed me tools when I asked for them. Raymond looked at the frame, not at me. "Art." I didn't know about any of the rest of it. The trust, the bank, none of it. I thought. He stopped. "I just thought you'd be fine and I needed the money and I made a bad choice." "I know," I said. After he left, I sat back down at the table. The coffee was going cold. I didn't touch it. At 10:47, my phone buzzed. Aldridge. "The notifications were delivered this morning," he said. "Julian's attorney contacted our legal department at 9:58. That's less than 2 hours after the letter arrived." "Who is it?" I asked. "Ryan Caldwell, young attorney firm in Midtown. He's filed a formal contest notice. Grounds are mental incapacity and undue influence. A pause. Exactly as Marianne predicted. Are we ready? 9 cognitive assessments, Aldridge said. Independent legal certification every year for 11 years. And you were not present at a single trust meeting which dismantles the undue influence claim before it can be built. His voice was steady. We are ready, Mr. Vance. Marianne made us ready. I sat with the phone against my ear and looked at the kitchen, the table where Marianne had done her research, the window she'd looked out every morning over her journal and her crossword and the calendar on the wall with October 14th still circled in red. How do you think Julian will react? I think he'll do what Chloe tells him to do, Aldridge said, which is what he's been doing for 12 years. Then my phone buzzed again, a second call coming in. Julian. I let it ring through. 30 seconds later, it rang again, then again. On the 4th call, I answered. Julian? My voice came out level. Marianne would have been pleased. Dad? His voice was high and tight, the voice of a man whose morning had come apart before 9. Dad, we got a letter from Empire Trust about a trust. It says there's... He stopped. In the background, I heard it. Chloe's voice, sharp and fast and close. Give me the phone, Julian. Right now. A rustling sound. Then a different voice on the line entirely. Mr. Vance, Chloe said. The voice was not the one from the video, the one recorded through the clock I'd built with my own hands, flat and certain and stripped of everything performed. This voice was warmer, carefully modulated the way a person's voice gets when they've practiced what they're going to say and want to land as reasonable. I knew the difference. Marianne had taught me without meaning to by being someone who never performed anything in her life. I'm glad you picked up. I think we should talk like adults about what's happening here. I'm listening, Chloe. Whatever Marianne set up, and I understand she meant well, this kind of arrangement creates real problems for the family, for everyone including you. A pause. Our attorney is already reviewing the trust documentation. Mental capacity in her final months is a legitimate legal question, and there's the issue of whether you had undue influence over her decisions during that period. I let that sit a moment. Outside the kitchen window, a pigeon landed on the garden fence, looked at nothing in particular, and left. Chloe, I said, how is Renfield Group doing these days? The line went quiet, not the quiet of someone thinking, the quiet of someone whose footing has just shifted without warning, who needs a half second to find it again before they can speak. I don't know what you mean, she said, her voice dropping half a register. The warmth was gone. Renfield Group LLC, I said. Delaware Incorporation 2019. I just wanted to check in on the business. Mr. Vance? Her voice was tight now, each word placed with the deliberate care of someone who has realized they are in a different conversation than the one they prepared for. Whatever you think you know. I know what Marianne documented, I said, which is most of it. Silence. 4 full seconds. This trust will not hold, Chloe said. I want you to understand that clearly. Mental capacity, undue influence. These are legitimate grounds, and Ryan Caldwell is one of the best estate litigators in the city. Marianne had 9 annual cognitive assessments, I said, conducted by a licensed physician at every single trust review from 2015 through this past March. Each one returned a finding of full legal and mental capacity. I kept my voice even. As for undue influence, I wasn't present at a single trust meeting. Not one. Marianne handled every aspect of it independently without my knowledge. I let that land. There's no undue influence when the other party doesn't know the asset exists. Another silence, shorter this time. Our attorneys, she started, will find the same documentation Tom Aldridge has been maintaining for 11 years, I said. Good morning, Chloe. I ended the call. I set the phone on this table, stood and went to the back door and opened it, and stepped out into the garden. The October air came in cold and clean off the harbor, the particular sharpness that arrived in the 3rd week of the month and didn't leave until April. I stood on the back step with my hands in my pockets and breathed it in. She had rattled me. I was not going to pretend otherwise, even to myself. The practiced warmth of those first sentences, the pivot to undue influence she had come into that call, prepared, and for the first 30 seconds of it, I'd felt the ground shift the same way it shifted in Baxter's conference room. The instinct to defend myself, to explain, to stand up and account for 40 years in a way that would make someone like Chloe finally understand what those 40 years had actually been. Marianne had known I would feel that. Don't let anyone rush you, the tape had said. Don't let anyone guilt you. I stood in the garden until the cold had worked its way through my jacket. Then I went back inside, picked up my phone, and called Aldridge. "She called," I said when he answered. "I expected she would. How did it go?" I mentioned Renfield Group. A pause. "How did she respond to that?" She went quiet, about 4 seconds. "Good," Aldridge said simply. "That means she understands the scope of what Marianne kept." He paused. "There's something else, Mr. Vance. Ryan Caldwell called me this morning separately from his filing. He asked to schedule a call with our legal team." Another pause. "Attorneys don't do that when they're confident. They do it when they've seen something in the documentation that's given them a reason to reconsider." I sat back down at the kitchen table. "He's seen the assessments. I sent the full evidentiary package to his office this morning per standard procedure. 9 assessments, 11 years of independent legal certification, physician attestations at every review." Aldridge's voice was careful. "He's a good attorney, Mr. Vance. Good attorneys don't continue cases they can't win." 2 days later, a text came in from an unfamiliar number. "Mr. Vance, my name is Ryan Caldwell. I represent Julian Vance. I'd like to meet with you directly before this goes any further. I think there are things about this situation you should know. Wednesday the 29th if you're available." I read it twice. Then I typed back, "Wednesday the 29th, 10 o'clock. I'll send you the address." I chose the coffee shop on Atlantic Avenue because the tables were small and low, and the chairs were the kind that made it physically difficult to perform anything. You sat in them the way you sat on a job site because there was work to do, and posturing cost time. Caldwell was already there when I arrived, younger than I'd expected, early 30s, navy suit, wire-rimmed glasses, a briefcase noticeably thin for a man who was supposed to be building a legal challenge. He stood when I came through the door and extended his hand. "Mr. Vance, thank you for meeting me." "You asked," I said. "Sit down." We sat. I ordered coffee black. Caldwell already had tea he hadn't touched. He set both hands flat on the table and looked at me with the directness of someone who had decided on the drive over that he was going to say what he came to say and not dress it up. "I'll be direct because I think this situation calls for it. Julian told me his mother was in significant cognitive decline in her final 2 years, confused, easily influenced. He said she was not in a condition to make sound estate decisions and that you had taken advantage of that." He paused. "That was the basis on which I agreed to represent him." "And now," I said. Caldwell opened his briefcase and laid a folder on the table between us. "I've read the full evidentiary package Mr. Aldridge sent over. 9 annual cognitive assessments conducted by a licensed physician at every trust review from 2015 through March of this year." He tapped the folder. "All 9 returned the same finding. Full legal and mental capacity. The most recent was 7 months before your wife's death." "She requested those assessments herself," I said. "Every year. She asked her doctor to document her cognitive state formally, not routine medical notes, a signed, dated assessment. She did it because she knew someone might challenge the trust one day." Caldwell nodded slowly. "That's exactly what the documentation shows. Your wife anticipated a challenge and specifically prepared for it." He looked at me steadily. "Mr. Vance, Julian told me she wasn't capable of that kind of forethought. These documents tell a completely different story." He closed the briefcase. "I was retained under false pretenses." The coffee arrived. I wrapped both hands around the mug. "What are you going to do?" "I'm recommending withdrawal to Julian today," Caldwell said. "If he refuses, I resign from the case." He paused. "I've represented Julian for 2 years on other matters. I don't believe he's a bad person. I think he's been in a marriage that made certain things easier not to see, and those choices compounded over time." He picked up his tea, set it back down without drinking. "The woman who built that trust, the documentation the physician records, the 11 years of preparation, she understood people very clearly. She understood her son. I thought about the second page of Marianne's letter. He is still our son, Art." "She did," I said. I reached into my jacket pocket and set my phone on the table between us, the video file open ready. I tapped play and turned it toward him without explaining. Caldwell watched the 30-second clip with his hands still and his face going through 3 distinct expressions. Recognition, then something colder, then the particular stillness of a man filing information away. When it ended, he looked up. "When was this recorded?" "March 2022, I said, "nearly 4 years ago." "She planned for this specific confrontation," he said, not a question. "She planned for every confrontation," I said. "She just made sure I didn't have to fight any of them alone." I had thought hard the night before about whether to show him that clip at all. Marianne had left me the evidence, but she had not left me instructions about Mercy, and that part was mine to decide. I could have handed the whole thing to Aldridge and let the lawyers grind it into a settlement without my ever having to look Chloe or Julian in the eye again. But I'd built too many things over too many years to trust work I hadn't done with my own hands, and this was work only I could do. I wanted the man representing my son to understand exactly what my son had signed on to, not from a document, but from a voice on a wall. And I wanted to be the one who chose to stop there at understanding rather than take it any further. That decision belonged to me, and I made it sitting at that small table with my coffee going cold. Caldwell was quiet a moment. Then he straightened and picked up his briefcase. There's a formal session scheduled at Attorney Baxter's office Wednesday, November 5th. Julian is expecting me to walk in with a full challenge ready. He held my gaze. I'll be walking in with a withdrawal notice instead. He stood to leave, and at the door he turned back. One more thing. Chloe contacted me separately 2 days ago. She said she had information and wanted to speak with you directly first. He paused. She didn't tell me what it was, but she sounded like someone who had already made a decision, not someone still fighting one. I looked at the empty chair across the table after he left and thought about Chloe calling Caldwell separately without Julian knowing 2 days ago, while Julian was presumably still believing his attorney was preparing a full challenge. Whatever Chloe had decided, she had decided it alone. Chloe called Thursday evening. Not the voice from Monday's call, not the prepared warmth, not the pivot to legal grounds, just a voice flatter than I'd ever heard from her, the voice of someone who had run out of versions of themselves to perform. "I'd like to come to your workshop tomorrow," she said, "if you'll let me." I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. 2 o'clock, I said. "You know where it is?" She did. I was at this main bench finishing the Connecticut desk when she arrived, the white oak piece that had been waiting since before Marianne's last hospitalization. I'd been working on it every morning that week methodically, the way I worked when I needed my hands to know what they were doing, while my head was somewhere else. Another day's work on the drawer fitting, and it would be ready. Chloe stepped through the door and stopped. She had been in this workshop once before, years ago briefly, when she and Julian came to pick something up. She'd stood in the doorway that time too, looking at the interior, the way people look at a foreign country, aware that rules applied here she didn't know. She was in dark clothes, no jewelry, her hands at her sides. "Sit down," I said without looking up from the drawer fitting I was checking. She sat in the Windsor chair I kept for clients. I finished what I was doing, set the drawer aside, and turned to face her. "Renfield Group has been insolvent for 14 months, she said. "No preamble, no performance. We owe $2.3 million to 3 different creditors, the house and the portfolio from Marianne's. Well, we needed them to cover the debt. That's why we moved so fast after the reading." She held my gaze. "I want you to know that's the truth of it." "I know," I said. She blinked. "How?" Marianne kept a folder. She closed her eyes for 1 full second. When she opened them, she looked like someone who had just had something confirmed that they'd been hoping might not be true. "Of course she did," she said quietly. She reached into her bag and placed an envelope on the workbench between us, thick letter-sized. "These are financial records, Julian's personal accounts, transactions that aren't clean." She kept her hand on the envelope a moment before releasing it. "I'm going to file for divorce. I need a fair settlement. I'm not asking you to go after him. I just need him to know you have this. That's all I'm asking." I looked at the envelope, then at her. "Chloe, why are you doing this?" She didn't answer immediately. Outside, the wind moved through the oak tree at the back of the garden, the one Marianne and I had planted on our 10th anniversary. I could hear it through the workshop walls. "Because I'm tired," she said finally, her voice rough at the edges in a way I hadn't heard from her before. "And because what happened at Baxter's office, what I said to you, I knew it was wrong while it was happening. I knew it before I walked in." She didn't look away. I just said it anyway. I pushed the envelope back across the workbench toward her. "Keep it," I said. "Use it for yourself if you need it. I don't need to hold anything over anyone." She stared at the envelope, then at me. "Then what do you want from all of this? What do you actually want?" "I want my son back," I said. "The rest is between you and Julian." She sat with that a long moment. Then she stood and picked up the envelope and put it back in her bag. At the door, she stopped and I saw something move across her face I had not seen there before. Not in Baxter's office, not on Monday's call. Something unguarded. "There's a letter," she said. "From Marianne." At the bank, there was an envelope with my name on it in the box. She paused. I didn't open it. I left it there. Why? Because I was afraid of what she'd written, she said, looking at the floor, and more afraid that she'd be right about me. She left. I stood in the empty workshop a moment. Then Alfie appeared from the back room, a sanding block in his hand, his expression carefully neutral, in the way of a young man who has overheard something and is deciding how much to acknowledge. Mr. Vance, he said, that black SUV, it came back Tuesday night. He held up his phone. I called the police first. They came, the car left. I got the report number. He set his phone on the bench. A short video shot through the side window, 2 shapes in the front seat passenger window down. Whoever it was, Alfie said, they saw the police car. They haven't been back since. I watched the clip once and handed the phone back. Good work, Alfie, I said. He went back to sanding. I stood at the bench with my hand on the Connecticut desk and thought about Chloe's face at the door. The unguarded thing in it, and about a letter sitting in a box at Empire Trust with her name on the front, in Marianne's handwriting unopened. Marianne had written it, had left it there deliberately for exactly this moment. She had known this day would come too. Mac called at 7. Sunday evening, and said 3 words. Apple pie, come over. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't say he'd been thinking about me. He just told me where to be and trusted me to show up the way he'd been doing for 40 years. I put on my jacket and drove to Sunset Park. The pie was on the counter under a dish towel, still warm. Chester was in his chair. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and the particular brand of motor oil Mac had used for 3 decades. Some things stayed exactly as they were no matter what happened in the rest of the world, and I had learned to be grateful for those things in a way I hadn't been before October. We sat with coffee and pie and didn't talk much. Mac asked how the workshop was coming. I told him the Connecticut desk was done, picked up Thursday, client pleased. He told me the boiler in his house needed a new expansion tank and he was putting it off because he didn't want to deal with the basement. Normal things. The kind of conversation that was really just 2 people agreeing to stay in the same room together. At 9:17, my phone rang. Julian. I looked at Mac. He looked at the phone. Neither of us said anything. I picked it up and went out to the back porch. The night was cold and clear, the kind of November cold that had real intention behind it. Brooklyn spread out below the hill in its usual pattern of lit windows and dark rooftops, and the distant red pulse of a tower somewhere over toward the harbor. Julian, I said. A pause long enough that I thought for a moment the call had dropped. Dad? His voice was different from Monday's call. The high, tight panic was gone, and what was left underneath was something younger and less defended. Can we just talk? Not about the trust or the attorneys or any of it. Can we talk? I'm here, I said. Go ahead. He told me he knew about Chloe going to the workshop. He'd found out Friday evening, not from her, but from Caldwell, who had called to formally notify him of the withdrawal. Julian had asked Caldwell directly whether Chloe had been in contact with him, and Caldwell, to his credit, had answered honestly. She didn't tell me she was going to do that. Julian said, his voice flat in the way voices go flat when someone is working very hard to keep them level. She didn't tell me any of it. The company, the debt. I knew things were bad, but I didn't know how bad. She kept telling me it was temporary. Julian, I said, when did you start being ashamed of what I do? The question sat on the line between us. I don't know, he said finally, the flatness cracking a little at the edges. I don't know exactly when. Chloe would say things and I let her. And then it became easier to let her than to push back. And then it became the way things were. A pause. That's not an excuse. No, I said, it's not. He was quiet a moment. Then, Dad, do you remember the bookcase? It was the last thing I expected him to say. The maple one, I said. You were 8. You picked out the wood yourself, a pale piece with a small knot on the left side. I picked it because of the knot, Julian said. You told me a knot wasn't a flaw. You said it was where the tree had worked hardest. His voice was rough now. I told everyone at school you made it. I was so proud of it. Another pause longer. I don't know when that changed, Dad. I'm sorry it did. My throat tightened. I looked out at the lit windows of Brooklyn below the hill and thought about a boy of 8 standing in a garage on a Saturday afternoon, watching his father work, asking questions I didn't always know the answer to. Your mother wrote about that bookcase, I said, in her letters. She kept it, Julian. It's still in her bedroom. She never moved it. The silence on the line was different this time, not empty, full of something he was trying to hold together. She kept it, he said. She kept it. He made a sound then that I hadn't heard from my son since he was a child, low and broken and completely unguarded, the sound of something that had been held in too long finally finding a way out. I stood on Mac's back porch in the November cold and listened to it and did not try to fix it or redirect it or make it easier. Some things needed to happen at their own pace in their own time. When he could speak again, he said, "Wednesday, I'll be there, at Baxter's office." "Good," I said. "Yeah, I'll be okay." When I came back inside, Mac was standing at the counter with 2 fresh mugs. He handed me one without a word. Outside, the November night pressed against the kitchen windows, and inside everything was warm and lit and exactly as it needed to be. I wore the black suit for the 4th time. The first was Julian's wedding. The second was Marianne's funeral. The third was the will reading 3 weeks and a lifetime ago in this same building. The fourth was this Wednesday morning. And this time I knew exactly what I was walking into and why, and that made all the difference. Mac rode up in the elevator with me. He wore his good flannel jacket, the dark green one he kept for occasions that required something more than work clothes, but less than a suit. And he stood beside me with his hands in his pockets and didn't say a word, which was exactly right. Aldridge was already in the conference room when we arrived, his files stacked in neat columns in front of him. He stood and shook our hands. Julian was there too, seated at the far end of the table in a chair that put some distance between him and the door. He looked like a man who had not slept well in several days. When I walked in, he stood the way he had at the will reading, but this time he didn't just touch my shoulder and sit back down. He gripped my arm with both hands a moment, the grip of someone who has something to say and hasn't yet found the words for it. I put my hand over his, and then we both sat down. Chloe came in 2 minutes later. She took a chair separated from Julian by 2 empty seats and looked at no one when she sat. Caldwell entered last. He set his briefcase on the table, opened it, and removed a single sheet of paper. Julian looked at his attorney with the expression of a man waiting for something he already knew was coming, but had not yet fully accepted. Baxter called the room to order. Caldwell stood before being asked. "Before we proceed," he said, "I need to formally notify all parties that I am withdrawing the contest notice filed on behalf of Julian Vance, effective immediately." He placed the sheet on the table. After a thorough review of the evidentiary record, including 9 annual cognitive assessments, physician attestations at each trust review, and 11 years of independent legal certification, I cannot in good conscience continue this challenge. The documentation is complete, consistent, and unimpeachable. He paused. I apologize for the time this process has taken. Julian stared at the table, his jaw set. He did not look surprised, but he looked like a man absorbing something final. Aldridge presented the trust summary structure assets distribution timeline. No one raised an objection. Baxter noted it for the record. Then Baxter looked at me. "Mrs. Vance left a final letter," he said, "to be read at this session in the presence of all parties. She left it in my keeping specifically for this purpose." He slid the envelope across the table. "Would you like to read it yourself, Mr. Vance?" "Yes," I said. I broke the seal. 4 pages, Marianne's handwriting, small and even covering every line. I read it out loud, and I chose to because I was not going to let anyone else be the voice that carried her words into that room. "If you are in this room hearing these words," she had written, "it means someone tried to undo what I spent 11 years carefully building. I want to be clear about something. The trust is not a punishment. It is not a rebuke. It is a recognition of a simple truth. The money in that trust came from Art's hands from 40 years of him showing up in other people's homes and workshops, fixing what was broken, building what was needed. He gave me his paycheck every Friday without once asking what I did with it. That trust is what I did with it." Julian pressed his knuckles against his mouth, his shoulders pulled inward. "To Chloe," Marianne had written, "I don't write this with anger. I write it with sorrow because I believe you are more than the choices you have made. The man you called ordinary has built things in this city that will outlast every deal you have ever closed. I hope one day you come to understand the difference between price and value. I think you already do a little. I think that is why this letter frightens you." Chloe looked down at her hands on the table and did not look up for a long time. "To Julian, my son, the maple bookcase is still in my bedroom. I never moved it. I need you to know that. I need you to know that I never stopped seeing the boy who picked out the piece with the knot because his father told him a knot was where the tree had worked hardest. That boy is still in there. Find him." Julian's breath caught. He pressed the back of his hand against his eyes and held it there. Mac beside me went very still. Aldridge looked out the window. And to art. I had to stop. One breath, two. Then I kept going. By the time you read this out loud, and I knew you would, because you have never kept important things to yourself. I hope you understand why I did everything the way I did. The life I planned is yours. The mornings are yours. Take all of it. You have earned every single day. All my love always and without reservation, Marianne. I folded the letter and pressed it against my chest with one hand. The room was completely still. Baxter removed his glasses, cleaned them, replaced them. The matter is resolved, he said. The trust proceeds to distribution. Julian stood when the session ended. He crossed the room and stood in front of me and opened his mouth and closed it again. Then he put his arms around me the way he hadn't since he was a teenager, fully without reservation. And I held my son in the conference room on the 8th floor of the Whitmore building and felt something that had been wound tight in my chest for 23 days begin finally to release. At the door, Chloe stopped and turned back. I went to the bank yesterday, she said. I opened the letter. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were red. She said she forgave me, 11 months before she died. She held my gaze. I don't know what to do with that. Neither do I said, but I think that's where you start. After the session, the city kept moving, the way cities do, without acknowledgement, without ceremony, without caring in the slightest that something had just ended and something else had not yet begun. I went back to the workshop, not because there was urgent work waiting, though there was always work waiting, but because the workshop was where I knew how to be, and in the weeks after November 5th, I needed to know how to be somewhere while I figured out everything else. Alfie was there every morning when I arrived. We worked side by side without talking much. A jewelry cabinet for a woman in Park Slope trim, work for a brownstone renovation on Bergen Street, a repair on a 19th century writing desk that had been in someone's family for 4 generations and had finally given up along the right side of the top drawer. The kind of work that required patience and attention and rewarded both. The best kind. One afternoon near the middle of the month, I looked up from the writing desk and said, Alfie, those nights the SU-5 was out there. You could have stayed in the back room and locked the door. Why didn't you? Alfie set down his plane. He thought about it the way he thought about most things, seriously, without rushing toward an answer. Because this is your place, he said finally. Some things are worth standing in front of. I looked at him a moment. 19 years old, permanently calloused thumbs, the particular stillness of someone who had already learned the most important thing about the trade, that the work required your full attention, or it required nothing at all. I need to talk to you about something, I said. He turned to face me. I'm going to step away for a while, close up the shop, take some time somewhere else. I don't know exactly how long. I set down the scraper I'd been using and leaned against the bench. When I come back, if you still want it, I'd like you to run this place. You'd have full operational authority. I keep the deed, you keep the work, and we figure out the arrangement as we go. Alfie stared at me, his mouth opening slightly. Mr. Vance, you called the police when someone came to scare us off, I said. You documented it. You got the report number. You kept showing up every morning for 8 months without being asked and without complaining once. I held his gaze. That qualifies you. He looked at the floor, then back at me, his jaw tight in the way of a young man trying very hard not to show how much something matters. I won't let you down, he said. I know, I said. Mac came by the following Saturday in the F-150. He walked the perimeter of the property the way he always assessed a job site, hands in pockets, slow, honest. He stopped at the workshop door and looked in at the tools hung in their proper places. The bench clear, the floor swept. You leaving it in good hands? He said. Not a question. The best I've got, I said. Julian came on a Thursday afternoon near the end of the month. He knocked at the workshop door and stood in the entrance, the way people stand when they're not sure of their welcome. And I said, come in. And he did. He walked the length of the space, slowly looking at everything with the particular attention of someone seeing a place clearly for the first time after years of not looking. He stopped in front of the shelving unit along the east wall, white oak, built into the structure of the building, fitted to the studs with wooden pegs instead of screws. He ran his hand along one of the shelves. How old is this? He asked. Built it in 2003, I said. When I first took the lease, took about a week. Julian looked at the pegs. No screws. Wooden joints hold better over time, I said. Screws are faster, but they work loose. The wood wants to move. You have to let it move together. He nodded slowly, his hand still on the shelf. I didn't know if he was listening to me about the shelving or something else entirely. but his face had a quality of attention I hadn't seen there in a long time. That evening, after Alfie had gone home and Julian had left and the workshop was empty and quiet around me, I walked the shelves and benches one last time. I ran my hand along the main workbench, 30 years of cuts and stains and the accumulated memory of everything I had ever built pressed into the grain. Then I began choosing the oak, the good pieces, the ones with the straightest grain, the tightest rings, the cleanest figure. I set them aside one by one. Gulf Shores would need a gate, something that faced the water and was built to last. Marianne had always wanted to fall asleep to the sound of waves. The house at Gulf Shores sat on a gentle slope above the waterline, 3 bedrooms, a wide back porch facing the Gulf of Mexico. I had bought it in November. Moving in had taken 1 truck 2 days and less time than I expected to understand that this was the right place. I spent the first 2 weeks of January making the gate. There was no deadline, no client waiting, just the wood and the light and the particular quiet of a Gulf Coast morning in winter when the air came in off the water, cold and clean, and the pelicans worked the shallows without hurrying. I fitted the rails to the stiles with wooden pegs, drawboard, and pulled tight. No fasteners, no shortcuts. A gate built that way would hold its shape through salt air and summer heat and everything else the coast could throw at it. It would outlast the hinges, probably outlast me. Mac drove down from Brooklyn on a Saturday the second week of January. He walked the property the way he assessed every job site, a slow circuit, hands in pockets, honest. He stood at the edge of the porch and looked at the Gulf a long moment without speaking. The water was green-gray and calm in the morning light, the kind of calm that felt earned. "She picked well," he said. "She always did," I said. He reached under his arm and handed me a flat package wrapped in brown paper. "Found this in the back of the supply cabinet when I was locking up the shop," he said. "Figured you'd want it." I unwrapped it. A photograph, black and white, slightly soft at the edges. Marianne and I young, standing in front of the Decal Avenue workshop on the day I signed the lease. She was wearing the coat with the large buttons, laughing at something off to the left of the frame. I was looking at her, not at the camera, at her. I had not seen this photograph in 30 years. I held it a long time. Then I set it carefully on the porch railing, went back to the gate, and picked up my mallet. We finished it that afternoon, Max steadying the post while I drove the hinges, working in the quiet of 2 men who had done physical work together long enough that they communicated in weight shifts and timing, and the small nod that meant, "Hold it right there." The gate swung open on its first try, smooth and even, and closed with a sound like something settling into place. Mac pushed it open, let it swing back, pushed it again. "Brooklyn oak," he said. "Best I had," I said. "That gate's going to outlast us both." I looked at it, the grain of the rails, the fit of the pegs, the way the morning light moved across the surface. "That's the idea," I said. After Mac went inside, I stood at the end of the porch. Alone, the Gulf spread out in front of me, Marianne's letter in my hand. The paper had gone soft at the folds from being opened and closed so many times. I found the paragraph on the 3rd page, the one I came back to. "You showed up," she had written. "Every single time without fail. You showed up. That is the whole story, Art. That is every single bit of it." Below the porch, the Gulf moved against the shore in long, slow intervals. Marianne would have put a chair right here. She would have read until the light was gone, and then sat in the dark just listening to this sound she had always wanted. I folded the letter and pressed it flat against my chest a moment. Then I put it back in my pocket. From inside the house, Mac called out that the food was ready. I took one more look at the gate, Brooklyn oak, fitted without fasteners, standing at the edge of the property, where the land met the water and built to move with the weather and hold its shape through all of it. Built the right way, with the right wood, by hands that had spent 40 years learning exactly this. Then I turned and went inside. Julian came down in March alone on a Friday with a duffel bag and a haircut that made him look younger and a nervousness he didn't bother to hide. The divorce was moving through the courts by then. Renfield Group had gone under the way insolvent things go under quietly and all at once, and he had taken a smaller job with a smaller firm and moved into an apartment he could afford without pretending. He stood at the top of the porch steps and looked at the gate for a long moment before he said anything. "You built this," he said, not a question the way I'd learned to say things that weren't questions from a man who used to let me hold the level. 2 weeks of mornings, I said. He ran his hand along the top rail, found the pegs where the stiles met, pressed his thumb against one the way you press a joint to see if it gives. It didn't. It won't. We spent the weekend not talking about any of it, and talking about all of it sideways, the way men like us do over a sink that dripped and a porch board that had cupped in the salt air. I handed him a chisel on Saturday morning and showed him how to pare the board flat, and he was slow and careful and got it wrong twice before he got it right. And when he got it right, he looked up at me with an expression I had last seen on an 8-year-old holding a piece of pale maple with a knot on the left side. Neither of us said what it was. We didn't have to. Some repairs you make with wood, and some you make by handing a man a tool and standing close enough to catch the piece if it falls. He drove back to Brooklyn on Sunday evening. Before he left, he stood at the gate again and swung it open and let it fall, shut open and shut, the same way Mac had, the same way I had, the way you test a thing you've decided you can finally trust. It's going to outlast us both, he said. That's the idea, I told him. They say God has a plan for every life, even when that plan looks like loss. Like a 62-year-old man walking out of a lawyer's office with a forged letter and a broken morning. I believe that now. I believe Marianne was part of that plan, quietly building something beautiful while I was too busy showing up to notice how much she loved me for it. This story is mine, but the lesson belongs to anyone willing to hear it. Don't be like me, friends. Don't wait until the letters are sealed and the keys are hidden before you tell the people you love what they mean to you. Real family justice doesn't come from courtrooms. It comes from 38 years of trust, of choosing each other quietly every single day. That's the kind of revenge these stories never tell you about, the slow kind, the kind that outlasts everything thrown against it. My own belief is that a man's worth was never in his title. It's in what he builds and who he builds it for. If this story moved something in you, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear what stayed with you. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that quiet strength is still strength. And if stories like this one matter to you, subscribe so you never miss another. Thank you truly for staying with me all the way to the end.